If he finishes this week, I'll eat the paperwork myself. The boy has never finished anything in his life. Gaston Aldridge did not lower his voice when he said it. He was standing 3 feet from Oswald Crowe's desk, suit jacket pressed to a razor edge, and he said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed into a belief. Clean, certain, faintly amused. He was not speaking to be cruel. That somehow made it worse. He was speaking because he was sure. If you have ever been counted out before you even walk through the door, stay with this story. And if it moves you, like and subscribe. What happens next will surprise you. Oswald Crowe did not answer. He sat at the far end of a desk that had survived 3 recessions and 2 lawsuits, and he looked at the single sheet of paper in front of him, the one he had written himself, 8 days ago, in longhand, before calling his sons into this room. He read it again now, silently, the way a man rereads a thing he already knows in order to hold himself steady. 7 days, $50, no credit, no contacts, no family name. That was all it said. No subclauses, no loopholes, no instructions on how to survive it, because that had been the point, to see who could figure that out on their own. Jasper had come back. Oswald had the report. 7 days, $49.80 spent. Accommodations arranged through a network of club acquaintances who technically did not know Jasper's last name. Technically. The kind of technicality that holds up only if no one looks directly at it. Fletcher had withdrawn on day 5. He had submitted a written explanation, 2 pages, single-spaced, detailing why the parameters of the challenge contained an implicit structural inequity that made genuine completion statistically improbable without external social capital. Oswald had read it twice. It was not wrong. It was also not an answer. And Silas. Gaston's file on Silas Crowe contained 3 entries for the entire week. A room rental receipt from a place called the Eastside Lodge, $12 per night. 1 day of recorded casual labor, and then silence, the kind that did not feel like failure, but did not announce itself as anything else either. The knock at the door was not tentative. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, the kind that does not ask for permission to be heard. Oswald said, "Come in." Silas Crowe was wearing the same clothes he had left in 7 days ago. Plain canvas jacket, dark trousers, boots with actual mud still in the treads. He was 24 years old, and he looked, at this moment, like someone who had not slept enough and had not particularly minded. He did not explain himself. He did not apologize for his appearance or offer context for the silence of the past week. He crossed the room in 8 steps, placed a single piece of paper, folded twice, creased hard at the corners, on the desk in front of his father, and stepped back. Oswald looked at the paper. He did not open it. Gaston, standing to his left, let out a quiet sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, something in between, something that had already decided. Oswald's hand moved to the paper and stopped. Because in 41 years of building things from nothing, the one thing Oswald Crowe had learned to trust was the pause before the answer arrived. The silence that meant something was about to change shape. This felt like one of those. 10 days earlier, the Crowe building had been quiet at 7 in the morning, the way expensive buildings are quiet, not empty, but controlled. The kind of silence that costs money to maintain. Oswald had called his sons for 8 a.m., knowing that Jasper would arrive at 7:55 and check his watch twice before sitting down. Knowing that Fletcher would arrive at 8:03 with a coffee he had ordered 4 minutes ago, and a reason the delay was not his fault. Knowing that Silas would arrive at 8 exactly, say nothing about the others, and sit in whichever chair was left. He had been right on all 3 counts. The room was not large. A round table, 4 chairs, a window that faced east. Oswald had specifically chosen a round table 30 years ago because he disliked the architecture of hierarchy. A man at the head of a rectangular table was already a statement before he opened his mouth. He was aware, with some private irony, that this principle had done little to prevent his sons from arranging themselves in a hierarchy anyway. Jasper always took the chair closest to the window. Fletcher always took the one across from it. Silas sat wherever the geometry of the other two left available. Oswald had set the paper in the center of the table. One sheet, no envelope. He told them what it said without waiting for them to read it. 7 days, $50. No credit, no contacts, no family name. He told them that Crowe Holdings would be restructuring its leadership in the coming year. Not a threat, a fact. And that he was 71 years old and had spent the last 4 years watching his sons manage inherited advantage with varying degrees of competence. He was not interested in competence. He was interested in something harder to name, and he believed 7 days with $50 might help him find the word for it. Jasper had listened with the expression he used in board meetings when someone was making a point he had already considered and found insufficient. He was 32 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that photographed well and conveyed authority in the three-quarter angle. He ran 2 divisions of Crowe Holdings with measurable efficiency and a reputation for not suffering what he called unnecessary friction. "This is a thought experiment," he said when Oswald finished, dressed up as a real one. Oswald had said, "I know what it is." Fletcher was 29 and had the particular energy of someone who processes the world through frameworks. He had a graduate degree in behavioral economics and used it the way some people use a Swiss Army knife, constantly and occasionally for things it was not designed for. Before Oswald had finished the second sentence, Fletcher's phone was out and he was making notes. "What counts as a contact?" Fletcher asked. "If I know someone in the area from a previous professional context, does prior acquaintance constitute a contact?" Oswald had said, "Use your judgment." Fletcher had written something down. Silas had not spoken. He was looking at the piece of paper on the table, not reading it, Oswald thought, just looking at it. And when the question came that Oswald had been waiting for, it did not come from either of the other two. "Is there a specific outcome you're measuring?" Silas asked. Oswald had looked at his youngest son. "Not yet." Silas had nodded once and not asked anything further. That single question and that single nod had lodged somewhere in Oswald's chest and stayed there for the next 10 days. After the meeting, Jasper had taken the elevator down with Gaston Aldridge, who had been waiting in the lobby. Gaston had been with Crowe Holdings for 11 years. First as outside counsel, then as a salaried advisor who occupied an office on the 14th floor and whose exact title had been updated 4 times without substantially changing what he did. What he did was manage the architecture of Oswald's preferences. He was very good at it. He was also, Oswald had known for some time, better at managing those preferences toward outcomes that suited Gaston than most people would have noticed. In the elevator, Jasper had said something to Gaston that Oswald did not hear directly. What Oswald knew was that 2 hours later, Gaston had sent a message to a contact in the Eastside property management network, a message that would not surface until day 4 of the challenge, and which, when it did, would carry the particular fingerprint of a man who was certain he would never be caught because he had never been caught before. Fletcher, for his part, had spent the evening before the challenge begins building a spreadsheet. It was, from a pure information architecture standpoint, impressive. Hourly cost projections, caloric intake ratios, neighborhood cost of living indices for 3 districts of the city. He had identified a rooming house in the Midtown corridor that charged $8.50 per night if you paid in advance, and a grocery configuration that would yield approximately 2,100 calories per day for $4.30. He had printed the spreadsheet and laminated it. He would refer to it 6 times on day 1 and stop referring to it entirely by day 3, when the laminated sheet would develop a coffee stain in the upper left corner, and its projections would have diverged from reality by a margin he had not modeled. Silas had packed a canvas bag the night before. No spreadsheet, no laminated documents, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, a small, spiral notebook with a pen clipped to the cover, and his phone, powered off because he did not trust himself to use it neutrally if it was on. He had set an alarm for 5:30 a.m. When it went off, he had gotten up, made his bed with the corners tucked at a 90-degree angle, a habit so old he no longer knew where it came from, and stood at the window for a moment looking at the city below. Then he had picked up the bag, left his keycard on the table, and walked out. He did not take a car. He walked to the bus stop 4 blocks east, checked the schedule posted on the pole, and waited. The bus came 8 minutes later. He took it to the end of the line. That was the last anyone in the Crowe household knew of his whereabouts for the next 7 days, which was, Gaston would later tell Oswald with a tone of careful neutrality, perhaps telling in itself. What Gaston did not know, what none of them knew, was what Silas had written on the first page of the spiral notebook before leaving. 3 words, pressed in with enough intention that they bled faintly through to the page below. Find the gap. He had written it the way a person writes a reminder, not because they might forget, but because they want to see it in their own handwriting, to make it real before the week made it necessary. The Eastside Lodge advertised itself on a handwritten index card taped inside a laundromat window. Rooms $12 a night, shared bath, no noise after 10 p.m., cash only. Silas had found it on day 1 by walking, not searching online, not asking at a front desk, but actually walking the grid of the Eastside district, block by block, reading what was posted on doors and windows and community boards, which is how people in this part of the city had always communicated things they did not put on the internet. He had $47 left after paying for the first night and a bottle of water from a corner store. He wrote the number in his notebook. He also wrote down the name on the laundromat window. Cole's Wash and Fold. Imani Cole, prop, established 2017. He wrote it not because he needed it, but because he was in the habit of writing down things that seemed like they mattered before he knew why. The lodge was run by a man named Arden, who was 63 and had operated the property since his mother left it to him, and who asked no questions beyond cash or card, answered by the sign on the door, and how many nights? Silas said one to start. Arden handed him a key on a wooden fob and pointed down a hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet, and that was the entirety of the welcome. The room had 4 bunks. 3 were occupied by men who worked shifts at a distribution facility 2 miles away, and who kept to themselves with the particular courtesy of people who understood that shared space was survivable only through mutual restraint. Silas introduced himself by first name only, took the remaining lower bunk, and was asleep by 9:30 p.m. He was up at 5:20 the next morning, which was earlier than anyone else in the room, and he did not make noise. He dressed in the dark, tucked the notebook into his jacket pocket, and went outside to sit on the front step while the street was still dim, and the only sounds were the HVAC units cycling on the building across the road and a delivery truck idling 2 blocks north. He opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote the date. Then he wrote, Day 2, $35 remaining. What does this street need that it does not have? He sat with that question for 45 minutes, not anxiously, with the focused patience of someone accustomed to waiting for the right shape of a problem to reveal itself before moving. By 7 a.m., he had 3 observations on the page. People were walking long distances to the nearest bus stop because the closest one had been decommissioned the previous fall, and the city had not yet replaced it. The laundromat, Cole's, opened at 7:30, but had a line forming at 7:15, which suggested demand exceeding current capacity. And the corner store 2 blocks west, which was the only food retail within a half-mile, charged prices that ran approximately 30% above the district average for comparable items, which was not gouging so much as the arithmetic of being the only option. These were not revelations. They were observations anyone would make if they stood still long enough to look. What struck Silas was not the existence of the gaps, but their specific geometry, the way each one reinforced the others, so that the neighborhood's difficulty was not three separate problems, but one problem wearing three faces. He was still sitting on the step, writing, when the line of events began that he had not planned for and could not have. The woman who came out of the building across the street at 7:22 was wearing a jacket that was too thin for the morning air and carrying two children's backpacks over one shoulder. She did not look at Silas or at anyone else. She was moving with the compressed efficiency of someone who had already calculated the minutes of her morning and knew there was no margin. She turned north toward the decommissioned bus stop, realized at the corner, turned again, and began walking east, toward the functioning stop, which was 11 blocks away. Silas watched her go. He wrote nothing. He closed the notebook. At 7:35, a patrol car rolled slowly down the street and stopped in front of the lodge. Two officers. The one who got out first was younger, with the deliberate posture of someone still performing confidence rather than inhabiting it. The one who stayed at the vehicle was older and had the expression of a man who had been doing this long enough to find most of it predictable. Silas did not move from the step. He had not done anything that required movement. The younger officers said they had received a call about a suspicious individual loitering in front of a residential property. He said it without inflection, which was a kind of inflection. Silas said, "I live here. I've been here since yesterday evening." The officer asked for ID. Silas produced his driver's license. The officer looked at the name, looked at Silas, looked at the lodge behind him, at the handwritten index card in the window, at the key on the wooden fob Silas had set beside him on the step. "You're a paying tenant here?" "I am. Under a verbal lease, which under Georgia OCGA Section 44.7.1 establishes lawful occupancy from the point of payment. My receipt is inside." He did not reach for it. He let the sentence stand. There was a pause. The older officer from the car made a small sound that was not quite identifiable as a word. The younger officer handed back the license. He said, "Someone in the neighborhood was concerned." Silas said, "I understand." He said it without edge. He meant it without warmth. It landed exactly where it needed to land, as a statement that required nothing further from either of them. The patrol car left. Silas sat for another 3 minutes watching the street. Then he picked up his key and went back inside to find Arden, because he wanted to pay for the next 5 nights in advance and get a receipt. What he did not know, because he could not have known, was that the call to the patrol car had come from the building directly across the street, a ground floor unit. The occupant's name, as listed in the property management system, was Patricia Clover, and she had lived in that building for 11 years and regarded the slow demographic shift of the Eastside with a specific and articulate resentment that she did not call by its real name. She had watched Silas through her window from 5:45 a.m. She had given it almost 90 minutes. Then she had picked up the phone. From her window, she also watched him go back inside, steady, unbothered, key in hand, and the set of her mouth said that the morning had not gone the way she had intended. Inside the laundromat, Imani Cole had seen the patrol car stop. She had seen Silas on the step. She had been opening her second dryer cycle of the morning, and she had watched through the glass with the quiet attention of someone who had seen this sequence before. The car, the step, the young man, the outcome that went one of two ways. And she had waited to see which way it went this time. It went the way that surprised her, slightly, not because the outcome was unusual, but because of the particular stillness of the young man. The way he had not shifted his weight or changed the angle of his shoulders. The way the citation had come from memory but without performance. She filed it away without deciding what to do with it. She had 2 baskets of folded laundry to sort, and a delivery running late, and a Thursday that was already shaping up to be a Friday's worth of problems. She did not have time to decide what to do with interesting young men sitting on steps. But she did not forget it either. The encounter with Fletcher happened on day 2, and it was not planned by either of them, which made it more honest than most of their conversations. Silas had walked to Cole's Wash and Fold at 7:50 to see if they needed anyone for sorting that morning. A simple offer, no pitch, no backstory. Imani Cole was at the counter, and she looked at him with the frank assessment of a woman who had been in business long enough to read people quickly and bill for her time even when she wasn't thinking about it. She said she had a pickup route that needed covering by 9:15, 4 stops within 6 blocks, and that she paid $14 for the round trip. Silas said he could do it. She looked at him for another beat, not suspicious, just accounting, and said, fine. He was back by 9:02. She counted out the $14 without comment and handed it over. He thanked her, wrote the amount in his notebook, and started to leave. She said, "You wrote something down." He said, "I track what comes in and what goes out." She looked at the notebook. He had not hidden it, but he had not offered it either. She said, "Most people who come asking for work don't bother with that." He said, "Most people who don't bother with that don't know where their week went." She almost said something, decided against it, and went back to the counter. Silas left. He found Fletcher 40 minutes later on the corner of Aldrich and 14th, which was technically the southern edge of the East Side and the northern edge of the Midtown corridor, a boundary that existed in municipal documents and in the way storefronts changed from independent to chain within the span of half a block. Fletcher was standing with a laminated sheet in one hand and a coffee in the other, looking at his phone with the expression of a man whose projections were being tested by observable reality. He saw Silas first. The laminated sheet went to his side. "You're staying in the East Side," Fletcher said. It was not a question. He was working from whatever data point he had, probably the bus route. "Yes," Silas said. Fletcher's eyes went to the canvas bag, the jacket, the boots. He did the calculations silently, and Silas could see the result arrive in his face. The faint reorganization of features that said, "He's doing this more directly than I am." "You found a room under 12 a night?" Fletcher said. 12 exactly. Fletcher looked at his sheet. "My model had 1150 as the floor, based on the available data for shared accommodations in the district. There was a listing at 850, but it required a 2-night minimum paid in advance, which represented a 17% capital lockup relative to total available funds." He paused. "I stayed in the Midtown corridor, 950 per night, within parameters." Silas did not say anything about the Midtown corridor's distance from the parameters of the challenge, which were not geographic, but were certainly implied by the choice of Eastside accommodation. Fletcher seemed to hear the silence anyway. "The challenge didn't specify district," he said. "No," Silas agreed, "it didn't." "What are you doing for income?" Fletcher asked. It came out with the rhythm of a research question, not competitive, but analytical. Fletcher's baseline mode was analytical even when he was competing. Silas said, "Work." "What kind?" "Whatever's available." He looked at Fletcher's laminated sheet. "What does your model say about income generation?" Fletcher hesitated. This was, Silas recognized, because the model did not say much. The model was built around minimizing expenditure. It had not fully addressed the income side of the equation. That was the kind of thing that looked like a small omission on a spreadsheet and felt like a larger one on day 2. The model suggests that informal labor opportunities in the target district yield between $11 and $16 per hour for unskilled tasks, Fletcher said. Skilled tasks commanding a premium of... "Fletcher," Silas said, not unkindly, "are you living on the model or in the week?" The question landed without cushion. Fletcher's jaw moved once without producing a word. "I need to get back," Silas said. "There's a second pickup run at 2 p.m. if she needs coverage." He left Fletcher on the corner of Aldrich and 14th, standing between his laminated projections and the gap between them and the street. He did not look back. There was nothing unkind about it. It was simply the direction he was heading. Fletcher stood there for another 4 minutes. Then he folded the laminated sheet in half and put it in his jacket pocket, where it would stay until he pulled it out on day 5 to write his withdrawal explanation on the back. Days 3 and 4 arrived together, the way days do when a routine establishes itself. Not comfortably, but functionally. Silas ran the morning pickup at Kohl's, wrote in his notebook during the afternoon quiet, and spent the evenings on the front step of the lodge, watching the street do what streets do when the people who manage them from a distance are not watching. He had begun to see the shape of something. It was not fully formed. It was the outline of an idea in the way that a shadow is the outline of a shape. But it was there, and it had to do with the laundromat's capacity problem and the delivery route gap and the fact that 3 businesses within a 4-block radius were outsourcing light logistics at rates that were individually modest and collectively significant. He wrote it all down in the notebook, carefully, without letting it become more than an observation. He had learned, somewhere, from something, he could not have said exactly when, that the distance between an observation and a plan was where most ideas went wrong. You had to stay in the observation until it was complete. You could not rush the shape into revealing itself. On day 3, mid-afternoon, Imani Cole came to the back doorway of the laundromat where Silas was sorting a delivery. Heavy items at the bottom of the cart, lighter on top, in an arrangement that Imani had specified without expecting him to remember after the first time, and stood there for a moment, watching him work. "You're sorting by weight distribution," she said, "not alphabetical or by customer." "Weight distribution is more efficient for cart handling," he said. "The route goes uphill from stop 2 to stop 3. Heavy at the bottom keeps the center of gravity stable on the incline." She looked at the cart. She looked at him. "I've been doing this route for 6 years," she said. "I know," he said. "The wheel wear pattern on the cart's left side suggests it's been favoring one direction on inclines for a long time." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. Imani picked up the next item in the unsorted pile and placed it in the bottom layer. "You're not just doing this for the $14, she said. "I need the $14, he said. But no. She did not ask what else. She had been in business long enough to know that the right time for that question was not the moment it occurred to you. On day 4, the letter arrived. It was not a letter exactly. It was a notice delivered to the property management company that handled Cole's Wash and Fold's building lease, expressing concern from an unnamed tenant representative about the conduct and identity of a day laborer operating out of the premises, and requesting verification that all contracted individuals held appropriate city business registration. The notice was worded with the particular precision of someone who had done this before. Not a threat, not a complaint, but a procedural request that carried the implicit weight of someone who knew which levers to use. The property management company called Imani at 2:17 p.m. She took the call in the back office, and when she came out, her face was doing the careful thing it did when she was deciding how to deliver information without attaching the emotion she was also feeling. She told Silas about the notice. She did not editorialize. She told him factually someone had flagged his presence to the property management company, and the company was asking her to verify the status of any informal contractor she engaged. Silas listened to all of it. Then he said, "Do you have the notice in writing?" She had it on her phone. The property manager had forwarded the email. Silas read it. He read it once quickly and then once more slowly, the way you read something when you want to understand not just what it says, but who it sounds like. He recognized the register. He had sat in enough rooms in the Crowe building to know the difference between a spontaneous complaint and a managed one. "This isn't from Patricia Clover," he said. Imani looked at him. "Clover? Your neighbor across the street. She called the patrol on me day 2. This is from someone with access to the property management company's intake process, which means it came from someone who knows how to reach them directly." He set the phone down. How long have you leased this space? 7 years. Any prior complaints about contractors or day workers? Not one. He nodded. He asked if he could use the back table for an hour. She said yes, with the tone of a person who had decided to see where something was going. He wrote for 50 minutes. When he was done, he had produced 2 pages. Not a letter, not a complaint, but a memo. It cited the Georgia Fair Housing Act, 42 U.S.C. Section 3604, and the city's Tenant Protection Ordinance, Section 12-19, both of which were relevant to pressure exerted on commercial tenants through a property management intermediary. It outlined the timeline of events clearly: the patrol call on day 2, now the management notice on day 4, and noted the pattern without asserting a direct causal connection that he could not yet prove. It was careful. It was not aggressive. It was the kind of document that does its work by existing rather than by making demands. "I'd like you to sign this," he said, "not because you need to, because I think it needs a signature from someone who has standing in this space. You do. I don't, not yet." Imani read it. She read it twice, which was, Silas had noticed, her habit when something required her full attention rather than her professional reflex. When she finished the second read, she said, "Not yet. What does that mean?" He said, "It means I'm working on it." She signed the memo. She forwarded it to the property management company with a single-line cover message. "Please see the attached in response to your inquiry." The inquiry did not resurface. That evening, she counted out the day's pay, $18, a bump she had decided on without announcing, and placed it on the sorting counter without comment. He wrote it in the notebook. He also wrote, "Day 4, interference confirmed, source unknown, continue." On day 5, Silas woke to find a message from Arden slipped under the bunk room door. It said, in Arden's particular handwriting, a tall, deliberate script that had probably not changed since the 1980s, that a person had called the lodge the previous evening inquiring about Silas's length of stay and whether his booking could be accommodated elsewhere. Arden had told the person that he did not discuss his guests with unidentified callers, and that if they wished to make a reservation inquiry, they were welcome to do so in person. He had then hung up. He noted this in the message because, he wrote, he thought Silas should know, and because in 40 years of running this place, he had received perhaps 3 calls of that nature, and none of them had resulted in anything good for the caller. Silas read the note, folded it carefully, and placed it in the back of his notebook between 2 pages he had not yet written on. He was not angry. He had moved past the point where this would produce anger, because anger required surprise, and surprise required the assumption that things would be different from what they were. He was building a clear picture of a clear pattern, and the pattern was more useful than the emotion it might have generated. What he needed now was to understand exactly who was coordinating the interference, and from what altitude. He walked to a public library branch 4 blocks from the lodge, one of the branch locations the city had retained after the consolidation that had closed 3 others, primarily because of a sustained campaign by neighborhood associations that Silas had read about in a municipal report he had found in the reference section on day 3. The library opened at 9 a.m. He was there at 9:01. He spent 2 hours in the reference section. He was not looking for anything dramatic. He was looking for the specific kind of paper trail that reveals itself only when you know which questions to ask. Property management company ownership structure, city contractor registration records, and the publicly available meeting minutes of the Eastside Community Development Authority, which held quarterly sessions and which, in its most recent minutes, had logged a presentation from a consulting representative on behalf of Crowe Holdings' affiliated interests regarding potential redevelopment feasibility in the Northeast Eastside corridor. He wrote the date of that meeting in his notebook. He wrote the name of the consulting representative, which was not Gaston Aldridge. It was a junior associate of the firm that Gaston used for external engagements. He drew a careful line connecting the associate's firm to Gaston's retainer, which was documented in the public record of Crowe Holdings' annual advisory disclosures. The line was not proof of anything, precisely. It was the kind of connection that required additional corroboration before it became something a reasonable person would act on. But it was also the kind of connection that, once drawn, does not undraw itself. He took photographs of the relevant pages with his phone, still powered off for calls and data, but functional as a camera, and closed the notebook. On his way back to the lodge, he stopped at the community board outside the neighborhood association office and spent 10 minutes reading the posted notices. Among them was a flyer for a small business roundtable, scheduled for the coming Thursday, 3 days from now, 1 day after the challenge officially ended. The roundtable was focused on logistics challenges for independent businesses in the Eastside, and it listed, as a point of discussion, the impact of the decommissioned bus stop on customer and worker mobility. He photographed the flyer. He wrote the date and time in his notebook. Then he walked back to the lodge because he had a delivery run at 2 p.m., and Amani's cart still needed the left wheel looked at. Jasper arrived at the Eastside Lodge at 4:40 p.m. on day 5, in a car that did not belong in this part of the city and was not pretending otherwise. He came in through the front door without knocking. There was no procedure that required it, and found Arden at the front desk. He asked for Silas Crowe. Arden said, "Room 3, but I give it a minute, he just got in from a run." Jasper did not give it a minute. He walked down the hallway. Silas was sitting on the edge of his bunk, boots off, writing in the notebook. He heard the footsteps before the knock. Jasper's particular gait, which was built for marble lobbies and had never fully adapted to industrial carpet. He did not look up when the knock came. Then the door opened without waiting. Jasper looked at the room. 4 bunks, industrial paint on the walls, a shared window that faced a brick wall. He looked at it with an expression that was not quite contempt. Jasper was too measured for contempt to be legible, but that contained something in its vicinity. "You're really doing this," he said. It was not an admiring statement. "I am," Silas said. "To what end?" Jasper stepped into the room. He did not sit. Men who are performing authority prefer not to sit on other people's surfaces. Dad's not going to be impressed by poverty tourism. You understand that, right? Staying in a $12 room for a week doesn't make you competent to run a company that manages $2 billion in infrastructure contracts. Silas closed the notebook. He set it on his knee. "Is that what you came to tell me?" "I came to see what you were actually doing." Jasper's voice had the particular quality of someone who was delivering a message on behalf of himself, while also claiming to be delivering one on behalf of a larger truth. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're playing a game nobody asked you to play, in a way nobody's going to credit." "Who's nobody?" "Dad, Gaston, the board." "The board doesn't vote on this." Jasper paused. A very small pause, the kind that happens when a prepared point meets a prepared counter. "Gaston advises Dad. Dad trusts Gaston. These are facts." "Gaston has been interfering with my week," Silas said. He said it without heat, the way you state a fact that you are prepared to document, if asked. Something shifted in Jasper's expression. Fast, and then gone. "That's a significant claim. It's a documented one." Silas looked at his brother directly. "Did you know he was going to, when you talked to him in the elevator on day 1? The room was quiet. The HVAC kicked on somewhere in the building. Down the hall, one of the other tenants was moving around in the kitchen. Jasper said, "You're reading into things." "Maybe." Silas stood, picked up his boots from the floor, and set them by the bunk neatly. "You should probably go. I have an early morning." Jasper looked at him for a moment, at the boots placed parallel by the bunk, at the notebook closed on the mattress, at the complete absence in his brother's posture of anything that needed to be defended. It was, Silas knew, not what Jasper had come to find. Jasper had come to find someone cracking at the edges, someone whose composure could be nudged into a reaction that would be useful later. What he found was a room in order. Jasper said, "The whole family is watching you make a mistake." Silas said, "Then they'll have something to watch." He held the door open. Jasper left without another word. His footsteps back down the hall were different from the ones that had come, quicker, with less performance in them. Silas closed the door, sat back on the bunk, and opened the notebook again. He wrote, Day 5, 4:49 p.m. Jasper. Did not know about the memo, or does not yet know I know he knew. Either way, tomorrow continues. He underlined tomorrow twice. Then he went to bed at 9:30 because the pickup run started at 6:15 and he needed to think clearly, and thinking clearly had always for him begun with enough sleep. Down the hall, the man in the kitchen finished washing a single mug, turned off the light, and the lodge went quiet in the way that $12 a night rooms go quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but honest. The kind of quiet that does not pretend to be anything other than what the day left behind. In the laundromat, Imani Cole was closing out the register for the day. The notebook entry she had not been meant to see. She hadn't been. She had seen it by accident when Silas left it on the sorting table to carry a basket. Had been 3 lines long. She had read it before she realized she was reading it, and then she had stood very still for a moment. It was not the content that stopped her. It was the format, the categories, observation, gap, resource, constraint, were not the categories of a man doing a survival experiment. They were the categories of a man conducting an assessment, the kind of assessment you run when you are trying to understand whether a thing that does not yet exist could exist and what it would take. She had put the notebook back exactly where he had left it. She had not said anything about it. But that evening, after the register was closed and the lights were off, and she was sitting in the back office with a cup of tea that had gone cold, she thought about it again, about the weight distribution of the cart, about the pattern of questions he did not ask out loud, but wrote down instead, about the way he had cited that statute in the memo, not from memory the way you recite something you've memorized, but from memory the way you recall something you've understood. There was a difference. She had been in business long enough to know the difference. She wrote nothing down. She did not make any decisions. She finished the cold tea, turned off the office lamp, and went home. But she left the back door unlocked, the way she had started doing at the end of day 2, without making it a policy or an announcement. Just leaving it unlocked, the way you leave a light on in a room where someone might need to find their way. Day 6 arrived with the particular quality of days that are running out of road. At the Crowe building, Oswald received a consolidated update from Gaston at 7 a.m. A 2-page brief with 3 sections. Section 1, Jasper's week, confirm complete, $49.80 spent, lodging verified, no violations of the stated parameters. Section 2, Fletcher's withdrawal, dated and documented, with the attached 2-page explanation that Gaston summarized in 1 sentence as inconclusive. Section 3, Silas, confirmed room rental, 1 day of casual labor logged at Cole's Wash and Fold, no further updates available, status unknown. Gaston's oral addendum, delivered by phone, was brief. He said, given the information available, in the absence of any substantive update from the youngest, it seems likely that Day 7 will produce either a withdrawal or a return with insufficient documentation to constitute completion. Oswald said, what does insufficient documentation look like? Gaston said, a receipt and a story. That's typically what people produce when they've gotten through something but haven't understood it. Oswald did not respond to that. He set the phone down and looked at the window, the same east-facing window from the meeting 10 days ago, and thought about the question his youngest son had asked, the one that had lodged somewhere and stayed. Is there a specific outcome you're measuring? Oswald had said, not yet, and he had meant it. He was still not sure he had a word for what he had been looking for when he wrote those 2 sentences on a sheet of paper. He knew that Fletcher's spreadsheet was not it. He knew, with more ambivalence, that Jasper's management of the parameters, technically correct, substantively hollow, was not it either. He did not know what Silas had done with the week. That was, he was beginning to understand, not an absence of information. It was the most interesting thing about the week so far. On the Eastside, day 6 moved in the rhythm that the week had established. Silas ran the morning pickup at 6:15. He returned by 7:50. Imani had a second coffee waiting on the sorting counter. She had not announced this as a policy. She had simply done it, and they worked in the parallel silence of 2 people who have learned the geography of each other's working space. At 9 a.m., the older of the 2 distribution workers from the bunk room, a man named Otis, who had lived at the lodge for 11 months and knew the East Side the way people know places they've survived rather than merely visited, knocked on the back door of the laundromat. He had never done that before. Imani looked at Silas. Silas opened the door. Otis said, "You're the one who's been doing the pickup runs." It was not a question. Silas said yes. Otis said, "My cousin runs a dry goods delivery out of the North End. 3 mornings a week, 5 stops, but he's down a driver until Thursday, and he's got a commitment that can't move." He looked at Silas steadily. "You available tomorrow morning?" Silas asked what it paid. Otis said $22 for the run. Silas looked at Imani. She nodded barely, the small nod of someone confirming a reference without being asked to. "Yes," Silas said. Otis left. Imani watched Silas write in the notebook. "How are you doing on the 50?" she asked. He told her, $14 earned from Kohl's, the lodge running at 12 per night for 6 nights. He had extended day by day, with a total of $47.30 spent as of this morning against the $50 limit, remaining $2.70. She looked at the arithmetic. "You're going to finish the week with $2.70. $2.70 in a notebook." She started to say something, stopped, said instead, "The notebook's not going on the receipt." "No," he said, "what's in it is." This was the moment, though neither of them identified it as such at the time, when the week shifted from being a thing Silas was surviving to a thing he had already understood. The shift was not dramatic. It looked like a man writing numbers in a spiral notebook on a sorting counter in a laundromat, while a woman with a dry cleaning business and a 7-year lease on a difficult building drank coffee and did not look away. That afternoon, Imani received a call. The caller ID said M. Cole, her property manager's assistant. The assistant said the management company had received a second inquiry, this one specifically referencing the memo Imani had forwarded 4 days earlier, and asking for clarification on the nature of the working relationship between Ms. Cole and the individual described in the prior notice. Imani said, "His name is Silas. He's a contracted day worker. I have receipts for every payment made, documentation of the scope of work, and the memo you already have on file. Is there something specific you need beyond that?" The assistant said she would pass that along. Imani hung up and walked to the back room. Silas was restacking folded items for tomorrow's run. She said, "Second inquiry, same channel." He said, "Date, time, exact wording. Can you forward me the call log if they followed up by email?" She found the follow-up email in her inbox. It had arrived 7 minutes after the call. She forwarded it to the notebook's record without comment. He photographed it. Together, without discussing it as a strategy, they had assembled the following by the end of day 6. 2 patrol call records from the district's public service log, both time-stamped and dispatch-coded. The original management notice with Gaston's associates firm in the metadata. Arden's written note about the lodge inquiry, and now 2 management follow-up emails, time-stamped, routed from the same inbox. It was not a legal case. It was a paper trail, which, in Silas's experience, was often more useful than a case because it did not require a courtroom to make its point. The hint arrived quietly, without choreography. Near the end of the afternoon, an older man who had been using the wash machines for the third time this week, Imani called him Mr. Alderton, a fixture of the neighborhood who had lived on the same block for 30 years and moved through it with the particular gravity of someone who had seen it change in every direction and survived all of them. Paused near the sorting area where Silas was working and said, "You're the Crowe kid." Silas looked at him. "I'm sorry?" Mr. Alderton said, "I know what you look like. Your father was in a photograph in the Tribune. Infrastructure Award 3 years ago. You were standing behind him." He studied Silas without judgment. "Wondering what you're doing over here?" Silas said, "Learning." Mr. Alderton was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mr. Crowe." Just that, not in the way of someone who was impressed by the name, in the way of someone who had decided that if the name was in the room, it deserved to be addressed accordingly, and that whatever Silas did with that acknowledgement was his to decide. Silas said, "Thank you, Mr. Alderton." Mr. Alderton picked up his laundry and left. Imani, who had been behind the counter and heard all of it, did not say anything. She filed it where she had filed the other things that did not yet have a place. The weight distribution sorting, the statute citation, the notebook format, the memo, in the category of things that were adding up to something she had not yet fully named. That evening she stayed late. She told herself it was the end-of-month inventory. She sorted through 6 weeks of receipts, organized by date, and when she reached the receipts from the past 4 days, she held them for a moment before placing them in the folder. $14, $18, 14 again, 18. She had bumped the rate on day 4 without telling him why. She had not told him why because she had not, at that point, fully articulated it to herself. She had paid 18 because the work on day 4 had been worth 18, but also because something in the weight distribution conversation had said to her, "This person is not doing what it looks like he's doing, and the only respectful response to that is to pay for the thing he is actually doing rather than the surface of it." She put the receipts in the folder and closed it. Outside, the street was doing the thing it did at 7 p.m. in this part of the city, settling into a version of itself that was less managed and more true. The delivery trucks had made their last runs. The distribution shift had changed over. The woman with the 2 backpacks was somewhere at the far end of her day, which had started 11 blocks from where it needed to, because of a decommissioned bus stop that the city had not yet replaced. Silas was on the front step of the lodge, notebook open, writing by the light from the window behind him. He was not writing observations anymore. He had moved past observations. He was writing the thing the observations had been pointing toward since day 1. Not a plan, an argument. A 2-page argument for why the gap was real, what it would take to close part of it, and who was already in position to begin if someone with the right resources decided to take it seriously. He wrote until 10:30 p.m. Then he folded the 2 pages along the same crease as the receipts, tucked them into the notebook, and went inside. Tomorrow was day 7, and after that there was a desk in a building 12 minutes away, and a man who had written a challenge on a piece of paper without knowing what answer he was looking for. Silas thought he might have found it. He thought it was not the answer his father expected. He thought that was, possibly, the entire point. He set the alarm for 5:30. He tucked the notebook under the edge of his pillow, not to hide it, but to feel it there, the way you keep something close when you know it matters. Then the room went dark, and the lodge went quiet, and day 7 was 11 hours away. 11 hours, and a folded piece of paper that no one had opened yet. Back in the Crowe building, Gaston Aldridge's desk held a response he had not yet sent. An email drafted that afternoon, addressed to the property management company's senior director, referencing the ongoing inquiry into Cole's Wash and Fold's contractor relationships, and suggesting that a formal audit of the business's city registration might be warranted. He had drafted it carefully. in the measured language of someone who had learned to build pressure without fingerprints. He had not sent it yet. He would in the morning, he had decided. Fresh eyes. He did not know, could not have known, that the forwarded email chain Imani had passed to Silas that afternoon already contained, in the metadata of the original property management notice, a string of routing data that would, when read by someone who knew what to look for, connect the notice back to its source with a clarity that no amount of careful language would be able to obscure. He would send the email in the morning. By morning, the notebook would be on a desk 12 minutes across the city, and the paper Gaston had not read carefully enough would already be working. Day 7 began the way the other 6 had. 5:30 a.m., the alarm on a phone that had not made a single outgoing call in a week. The room still dark around 3 sleeping men who worked shifts and minded their own lives. Silas dressed quietly, tucked the notebook into his jacket, and did not look at the bunk he was leaving behind with any particular sentiment. He had paid for 6 nights. He had used 6 nights. That was the entirety of the transaction, and clean transactions were one of the few things in the world he considered genuinely satisfying. He went outside. The street was the version of itself that only existed before 7 a.m., quieter than it looked during the day, more honest somehow, the way places are honest when the people performing them have not yet arrived. He sat on the step and opened the notebook to the 2 folded pages he had written the night before. He read them once, not to revise, the time for revision had passed, but to confirm, to make sure that what was on the paper was what he actually believed, rather than what the week had made him want to believe, which was a different thing and an easier mistake than most people admitted. It held up. The argument was sound. The observations were documented. The gap was real, and the path toward closing part of it, not all of it, not overnight, but part of it, the part that was addressable with modest capital and a willing partner, was laid out in plain language without drama or overstatement. He folded the pages back along their crease and returned them to the notebook. Then he did the delivery run for Otis's cousin at 6:15, covered 4 stops in the North End in 48 minutes, returned the cart, collected $22 in cash, wrote it in the notebook, and walked to the bus stop, the functioning one, 11 blocks east, and took the first bus of the morning toward the center of the city. He had $2.70 remaining from the 50. He had $22 from the morning run, which was not part of the 50 because it had been earned after the 7-day limit technically expired at midnight. He counted the $2.70 into his palm, looked at it for a moment, then put it in his pocket. The 22 went in a separate pocket. The notebook went under his arm. He did not go to the Crowe building first. He went back to Cole's wash and fold. Imani was opening the front gate when he arrived, 7:51 a.m., the same time he had arrived every morning this week, and she did not look surprised. "You're done," she said. It was not a question. "Week's up at midnight," he said. "I wanted to bring you something before I went uptown." He handed her the notebook. Not the folded pages, those he kept. The notebook itself, open to the section he had been building since day 1. The observations, the gap analysis, the specific logistics proposal for expanding her delivery coverage into the North End corridor using the spare route capacity that Otis's cousin had just demonstrated existed. She read it standing in the doorway with the gate half open. She read it the way she read things that required her full attention. Twice, without comment, the second time slower than the first. When she finished, she looked at him. "You wrote this for me." "I wrote it because of what I saw," he said. "You can do whatever you want with it. You probably already knew most of it." "I knew the gap," she said. "I didn't have it on paper." "Now you do." He reached into his jacket and produced a separate folded sheet, the 2 pages from last night. "This is the version I'm taking with me. It's the same argument, different audience." She looked at the second sheet without taking it. "Who's the audience?" He said, "Someone who has the capital but hasn't seen the street." She was quiet for a moment. The gate swung gently in the morning air. From inside the laundromat came the sound of a drum cycle winding down. The first machine of the day, running before she had even unlocked the front. "Mr. Crowe," she said. She said it the way Mr. Alderton had said it the day before. Not deferential, not impressed. Calibrated. The acknowledgement of a person who has decided that a name, when it belongs in the room, should be spoken clearly. He said, "Ms. Cole." She took the notebook. She would return it to him, she said, when she had made a copy of the relevant pages. He said that was fine. He said he would be in touch about the proposal if she was open to it. She said she would think about it, which in her particular register meant yes, but on her terms, in her timeline, which were things he understood and respected without needing to say so. He walked to the bus stop. He took the second bus of the morning. The Crowe building was 12 minutes away, and the paper in his jacket pocket had been folded and unfolded enough times that the crease was soft, the way a thing gets when it has been handled by someone who was not sure it was ready but kept coming back to check. Oswald Crowe was on his second cup of coffee when his assistant told him Silas was in the lobby. He said, "Send him up." He did not call Gaston. He would realize later that this instinct to receive this particular result without an interpreter was the first honest thing he had done in the whole 10 days of the challenge. Silas came in. He looked like a man who had slept enough and worked enough and thought enough. He looked, Oswald thought, like someone who had gone somewhere and come back with something, which was different from someone who had gone somewhere and come back. The folded paper went on the desk. Oswald looked at it. He did not open it. "Tell me first," he said. Silas sat. He did not reach for the paper. He said, "The Eastside district has a logistics gap between the North Corridor and the independent businesses in the central blocks. 3 businesses I identified are outsourcing light delivery at rates that individually don't justify a dedicated route, but collectively do, by a margin of roughly 31% above the cost of a single organized circuit. There's a laundromat with 7 years of operation, strong customer retention, and a delivery service that's capacity constrained by equipment and route design. The owner is competent, undercapitalized for expansion, and has been operating in a space that someone with adjacent interests has been quietly pressuring through a property management intermediary." He stopped. "Let that land without decoration." Oswald said, "Adjacent interests." Crowe Holdings has a consulting representative who presented a redevelopment feasibility study to the Eastside Community Development Authority 4 months ago. The study covers the Northeast Corridor. Cole's Wash and Fold is in the Northeast Corridor. Silas's voice was even, not accusatory, precise. "I don't know if the pressure was coordinated with the redevelopment interest. I know it was coordinated. The paper trail is in that notebook." Oswald set down his coffee cup. He set it down carefully, the way a man sets something down when he wants his hands free to think. "Gaston," he said. It was not a question either. The original notice came through a firm he retains for external engagements. The routing metadata is in the email chain. Imani Cole, the laundromat owner, has all of it on file. Silas leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here to bring you a complaint about Gaston. That's a separate conversation and you can have it with him whenever you decide to. I'm here because the challenge asked for 7 days and $50, and I want to show you what $50 in 7 days actually looked like." Oswald opened the paper. He read it. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when something important is happening, and both people in them have agreed, without saying so, to let it happen at the pace it needs. The proposal was 2 pages. It was not formatted like a business plan. It did not have headers or bullet points or projected returns in a table. It was written in plain prose, the way you write something when you want the argument to carry the weight rather than the presentation. It proposed a modest expansion of Cole's Wash and Fold's delivery circuit using a single additional vehicle and 2 part-time drivers, consolidating the North End logistics demand that currently flowed to three separate informal contractors into one organized route. The capital requirement was specific: $18,400 for equipment, initial operating costs, and 6 months of working capital buffer at conservative revenue projections. The return timeline was 22 months to break even at current demand levels, 14 months if the Northeast Corridor's projected foot traffic materialized. It cited the Community Development Authority's own traffic projections, the same document Silas had found in the library reference section on day 3. At the bottom, in the same hand as the rest of it, was one additional line. This is not a real estate opportunity. This is a business that already exists, run by a person who already knows how to run it, in a neighborhood that is about to be changed in ways that will make it harder for that business to survive. The question is whether Crowe Holdings wants to be the capital that helps it grow or the pressure that helps it disappear. Oswald read that line twice. Then he set the paper down, flat on the desk, and looked at his youngest son. "You wrote this in a lodge on the east side," he said. "Day 6 evening, back step, notebook." Silas's voice was quiet. "The notebook is with Miss Cole. She's making copies of the relevant pages. She knows you're a Crowe. Mr. Alderton told her on day 6. She'd already seen enough to have her own opinion." Oswald looked at the paper again, not reading it, looking at it, the way you look at something that has shifted the geometry of what you thought you were measuring. "Jasper completed the challenge," he said, "by the parameters." "I know," Silas said. "He used a network of people who knew his last name without being told it. That's not a violation of the stated rules. It's a statement about what he reached for when resources were constrained." And Fletcher withdrew. Fletcher's explanation is honest. The challenge did contain structural inequities. He's not wrong about that. He's right in the way that people are right when they use analysis to describe a problem they don't want to enter. Oswald was quiet for a long moment. Outside the east-facing window, the city was doing what it did at 8:30 a.m. on a Thursday, moving with the compressed momentum of a thing that does not care whether you are keeping up with it. "What did the $50 actually cost you?" Oswald asked. $47.30, Silas said. 6 nights at $12, 1 bottle of water, 2 meals from the corner store on days 1 and 2, before I established the work arrangement with Miss Cole. "And the notebook?" Silas looked at him steadily. "I had the notebook before the challenge started." Oswald almost smiled. It was a very small almost, the kind that does not make it to the face, but changes the quality of the silence in a room. "I'm going to call Gaston in," Oswald said. "That's your decision," Silas said. "I'd suggest you read the email chain before you do. Not because it changes what you already know. You know Gaston. But because the chain shows the sequence, and the sequence matters for what you decide the consequence is." He stood. He straightened his jacket, the canvas one, still carrying the faint geography of a week's worth of street-level work. He did not reach for the folded pages on the desk. He left them there. "The proposal stands on its own," he said. "Whatever you do with it is separate from whatever you do about the rest." He walked to the door. His hand was on the frame when Oswald said his name. He turned. Oswald looked at his youngest son across a desk that had survived 3 recessions and 2 lawsuits and now, apparently, a week that had managed to say something none of the other things had quite said. "Why the East Side?" he asked. "You could have gone anywhere in the city, found something easier." Silas said, "Because the challenge said $50 in 7 days. It didn't say comfortable." A pause, short, considered. "And because the East Side is where your redevelopment interest is. I wanted to see what you were looking at before deciding what I thought about it." He left. The door closed with the quiet click of a thing that has said what it needed to say. Gaston Aldridge arrived at 11:45 a.m. He had received the call from Oswald's assistant at 11:30 and had taken 15 minutes, not to prepare exactly, because Gaston did not need to prepare in the way that people who are caught off guard need to prepare. He needed 15 minutes to decide which version of the truth was most defensible, which was a different process and one he had refined over 11 years. He arrived with a legal pad in the particular composed alertness of a man who has navigated difficult conversations before and arrived on the other side of them intact. Oswald had the email chain open on his screen. He had read it once quickly and once slowly, the way he had been told to, and by the time Gaston sat down, Oswald had a clear picture that was not entirely a surprise and was entirely a disappointment, which are two things that can coexist without resolving each other. He did not open with an accusation. He opened by reading aloud. Email dated the 4th day of the 7-day challenge period, he said. Recipient, Property Management Intake, Eastside Holdings Group. Subject line, Contractor Compliance Inquiry. Message begins. On behalf of a long-standing client with interests in the Northeast Eastside corridor, we wish to flag a concern regarding informal labor arrangements at a commercial property within our client's area of interest. He stopped reading. He looked at Gaston. The routing metadata on the original email connects to the IP address registered to the 7th floor of this building. Your floor. Gaston said, I can explain the context. Oswald said, I'm sure you can. Gaston, you're very good at context. He set the printout down. What I want to understand is the decision. Not the language of it, the decision. You chose during a week when I had asked my 3 sons to complete a challenge, with no interference from this office, to actively pressure a business in the area where one of my sons was staying. I was protecting the redevelopment interest. You were protecting your position in the redevelopment interest, Oswald said. The correction was not loud. It was the kind of quiet that has more weight than volume. You were protecting the outcome that benefits your engagement with this company. And you used a mechanism that you believed was untraceable because you have used similar mechanisms before and they have remained untraceable. He paused. My son traced it in 4 days with a library card and a notebook. The legal pad on Gaston's knee had not moved. He said, the pressure applied was procedural. No laws were violated. No statutes, Oswald said. That's a different thing. He closed the laptop. I'm going to ask you to take a leave of absence while I have the full scope of the Eastside engagement reviewed by outside counsel. That review will take approximately 90 days. At the conclusion of the review, we'll discuss the path forward. Gaston said, Oswald, this isn't a discussion, Oswald said. It's a statement of what happens next. I'm being direct with you because 11 years deserve directness, but the decision is made. Gaston stood. He picked up the legal pad. He had the particular stillness of a man who is recalibrating in real time, measuring what could still be managed, what was already beyond management, and where the line between those two things fell. He said, the redevelopment interest is legitimate. Whatever else happened, the Northeast Corridor analysis is sound. I'll have it reviewed, Oswald said, independently. Gaston left. His footsteps in the hallway had the quality of someone walking carefully on ground that was no longer entirely certain. Jasper came in at 2 p.m. He had not been called. He had heard from his assistant that Gaston had left the building with a legal pad and without his usual closing pleasantries to the front desk. And Jasper had assembled from this a picture that was not entirely wrong and not entirely right. He sat across from Oswald without being invited to sit, which was his habit and which Oswald had long since stopped noting. You read what Silas brought, Jasper said. I did. And Gaston? Gaston is taking a leave of absence pending an outside review of the Northeast Eastside engagement. Jasper absorbed this without visible reaction. He was very good at that, receiving information that changed things without allowing it to change the surface of his face. The challenge, he said. You're counting Silas's week as a completion. Oswald looked at his eldest son. The east-facing window was behind him, and the morning light had shifted to the flatter angle of afternoon. And Jasper looked in this light very much like the man he had spent 32 years becoming, capable, managed, effective at every task that could be defined in advance and resourced appropriately. I'm counting it as the most informative answer to what I was actually asking, Oswald said. Whether it qualifies as a completion of the stated parameters is something you can argue if you want to argue it. You're right that the parameters don't prohibit earning income. You're also right that Silas stayed in the Eastside specifically because that's where the redevelopment interest sits, which means his week was not accidental. He gamed it, Jasper said. The word was clean, controlled. He understood it, Oswald said. That's what I was measuring. I just didn't know that's what I was measuring until I saw what he brought back. Jasper was quiet, the kind of quiet that is not acceptance, but is not ready to be refusal yet. The proposal in the notebook, he said finally, you're going to fund it. I'm considering it, independently of the redevelopment question. If the Northeast Corridor development moves forward, it moves forward in a way that accounts for the existing businesses in the corridor. That's a condition I'm adding to the terms. He paused. Regardless of what else Gaston was doing, the corridor analysis may be sound. But analysis that arrives through a compromise process requires revalidation. That's basic procedure. Jasper said, the laundromat owner, Cole. Ms. Cole, Oswald said, yes. You've talked to her. Silas has talked to her. I intend to, when she's ready. On her terms and her timeline. He looked at Jasper steadily. She signed the memo that stopped the property management pressure. She held the line of a business she's operated for 7 years without the kind of capital backing that would have made any of this easier. That's not a charity case. That's a competent operator in a difficult market who has been working against resistance she didn't fully understand. Jasper said nothing. He looked at the desk, at the folded 2 pages still lying on it where Silas had left them. He left the proposal here, Jasper said. He said it stands on its own. Another silence, longer this time. Jasper reached out and picked up the 2 pages. He read them. He read them fully, both pages, including the line at the bottom. Oswald watched him read the line at the bottom and watched something move across his face that was not quite recognizable as anything Jasper usually showed. He set the pages down exactly where they had been. He wrote this on a back step, Jasper said, in a notebook. Day 6, Oswald said. From what I understand, the notebook is with Miss Cole now because she's copying the relevant sections. Jasper stood. He straightened his jacket, a different jacket from Silas's, a better jacket by every measurable standard, and one that had not been anywhere near a back step in its lifetime. At the door, he stopped. He did not turn around. I use the Aldrich Club's guest referral network, he said, for the lodging. 3 phone calls on day 1. A pause. I knew Gaston would be monitoring the week. I thought, if Silas struggled, it would confirm what I already believed. I didn't ask Gaston to do what he did, but I knew he would do something. And I didn't tell you. He left before Oswald could respond, which may have been, Oswald thought, the most honest thing Jasper had said in a very long time, and the only way he knew how to say it. 3 months passed in the way that months pass when a thing is being built rather than announced. Quietly, with setbacks, with the specific tedium of institutions moving at the pace institutions move. The outside council review of the Eastside redevelopment engagement was completed in 11 weeks. Its findings were characterized, in the formal language of the report, as identifying procedural irregularities in third-party engagement practices inconsistent with Crowe Holdings' stated governance standards. The report recommended restructuring the engagement terms for the Northeast Corridor project and separating the consulting function from any individual with a personal financial interest in the outcome. Gaston Aldridge did not return from his leave of absence. He submitted a letter of resignation on the 68th day of the 90-day review period. The letter was 3 sentences long. No public statement was issued by either party. The industry trade publication that typically covered executive movements at Crowe Holdings ran a two-line item. Gaston Aldridge, senior advisor, has departed to pursue independent opportunities. No one from the company added color to that characterization. The two patrol call records from the Eastside and the email chain connecting them to the third-party engagement were provided to the city's Office of Professional Accountability by Imani Cole directly, on the advice of a community organization attorney. The OPA opened a preliminary inquiry. The two officers involved in the Day 2 stop were not named publicly in the inquiry, but their precinct captain received written guidance on the parameters of reasonable suspicion detentions under Terry v. Ohio, 392 U.S. 1, with specific reference to the documentation requirement for calls originating from residential complainants. The guidance was logged in the department's internal review system. Whether it changed anything on the ground was not yet determinable. Patricia Clover's building management contract came up for renewal 2 months after the OPA inquiry opened. The property management company, citing a review of its tenant relations protocols, did not renew the arrangement for the specific unit liaison role that Clover had used to initiate the complaint chain. She retained her lease. She remained, as far as the public record showed, a resident of the ground floor unit. She did not, in the 3 months following, make any further calls about the building across the street. Coles Wash and Fold received a preliminary investment commitment from Crowe Holdings Community Capital Division, a division that had existed on paper for 4 years and had made exactly one prior investment. The commitment was for $18,400, structured as a convertible note with a 24-month maturity and terms that Imani Cole's attorney had reviewed and found reasonable. The first vehicle was purchased in the second month. The North End delivery circuit launched in the 7th week, covering 9 stops on a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday rotation. Otis's cousin was the first contracted driver. The circuit ran 3% above revenue projections in its first 4 weeks, which Imani noted in the operational log she had started keeping in the format that the notebook had outlined, without acknowledging where the format had come from. The small business roundtable that Silas had photographed on the community board, the one scheduled for the Thursday after the challenge ended, had taken place with 14 attendees and one agenda item that ran 40 minutes over time: the decommissioned bus stop. A petition with 312 signatures was submitted to the City Transit Authority in the following week. The Transit Authority's response, dated 6 weeks later, indicated that the stop would be under review for reinstatement in the next budget cycle. The next budget cycle was 7 months away. The petition signatories were informed. Most of them continued walking 11 blocks. The Crowe family did not hold a formal meeting about the challenge results. There was no announcement, no ceremony, no moment in the round table room where Oswald declared a winner. The round table room was used for a planning session in week 2, a vendor review in week 4, and a lunch between Oswald and a city infrastructure contact in week 6. And none of these events referenced the 7 days, or the $50, or the folded paper that still sat in the upper right drawer of Oswald's desk, because he had put it there and had not yet decided what to do with that particular object. What did happen was a series of individual conversations, each one smaller and less dramatic than the week had seemed to deserve, each one carrying the specific weight of things that do not get said cleanly, but get said anyway. Fletcher called Silas on the second week. He said he had read the proposal. Oswald had shared it with both brothers, without commentary, and that the methodology was sound, but that the capital allocation model underweighted tail risk in the event of the Northeast Corridor development stalling. Silas said he had accounted for a 30% demand reduction scenario in the projections. Fletcher said he hadn't seen that. Silas said it was in the notebook, page 9. There was a pause. Fletcher said, "I don't have the notebook." Silas said he knew. He would send the relevant page. He did, that afternoon. Fletcher sent back a single-line response. "The model holds. Good work. It was the most direct compliment Fletcher had given anyone outside of a peer-reviewed context in 4 years. And Silas did not make anything of it, which was probably the correct response. Jasper did not call. He sent a message 2 weeks after the round table room cleared of its first post-challenge agenda. It said, "I reviewed the corridor analysis. The laundromat's location is not in the primary redevelopment footprint. It would have been fine either way." A pause in the message thread then. "That's not the point. I know." Silas wrote back, "No, but it's useful to know." The thread went quiet after that. Neither of them closed it. Oswald drove to the East Side on a Tuesday morning in the 9th week after the challenge ended. He drove himself. No assistant, no briefing materials. He parked on the street in front of Cole's Wash and Fold at 758 and sat in the car for a moment, looking at the handwritten sign in the window. Cole's Wash and Fold. Imani Cole, prop. Established 2017. And below it, newer, in a different hand, North End Delivery, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. He went in. Imani Cole was behind the counter. She looked at him the way she looked at most things that required her assessment, directly, without performance, allowing herself the time to form an opinion rather than reaching for one pre-made. She said, "Mr. Crowe," not Oswald, not Sir. "Mr. Crowe, the same register as Mr. Alderton, the same calibrated weight." He said, "Ms. Cole, thank you for seeing me." She said she hadn't agreed to see him. He had just shown up. He said that was true, and that he was sorry for the lack of advance notice, and she said she appreciated the apology more than most people would have expected to, which told him something about the last 3 months. He asked if he could sit. She gestured toward a folding chair near the counter. He sat. The washing machines ran their cycles. The room smelled of clean fabric and drier heat, which is one of the few industrial smells that does not become unpleasant with repetition. He told her that the investment commitment stood, and that the review of the pressure campaign had confirmed what the email chain showed, and that the company was restructuring the terms of the Northeast Corridor engagement. She said she knew. Her attorney had kept her informed. He said he wanted to tell her directly, rather than through intermediaries, that the targeting of her business during those 4 days had not been sanctioned by him and would not have occurred had he known. She said she appreciated that distinction. She also said, without particular edge, that the distinction mattered less than whether the systems that allowed it to happen were actually being changed, and that she would be watching for the latter rather than resting on the former. He said, "That's fair." She said, "Yes, it is." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. The drum cycle on machine 3 clicked into the spin phase. Oswald looked at the operation around him, the organized baskets, the route chart on the wall with Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday blocked in blue marker, the small whiteboard that tracked the week's incoming and completed deliveries in a handwriting he recognized from the notebook. He said, "My son said you already knew the gap. You just didn't have it on paper." She said, "Your son understood the difference between knowing a thing and being able to act on it." She straightened a stack of folded items on the counter. "Most people who come through here with money and intentions lead with the money." He led with the notebook. Oswald said he would keep that in mind. She walked him to the door when he stood to leave. On the step, the same step where Silas had sat at 5:20 a.m. on the first morning of the week, she said, "The bus stop petition is in the next budget cycle." He said, "I know. I have a contact in transit planning." She looked at him steadily. "That contact's been there for 4 years." A pause. He said, "I'll make a call." She said, "That would be useful," and went back inside. He stood on the step for a moment. The street was doing its mid-morning thing. The delivery trucks, the walkers, the HVAC units, the ordinary, unmanaged life of a place that does not arrange itself for inspection. He looked at it for a long moment, the way you look at something you have not looked at carefully before, and are not sure whether what you're feeling is recognition or something closer to shame, and which does not resolve into either cleanly. Then he got in the car and drove back toward the center of the city, where Crowe Holdings occupied 14 floors of a building that had survived 3 recessions and 2 lawsuits, and a lot of other things besides. The folded paper in the upper right drawer of Oswald's desk stayed where it was. He had not decided what to do with it, and he was in the habit, a late developing habit, one he had not had at 50 or 60, but had arrived at somewhere in his late 60s, of not forcing a decision when the object requiring a decision had not finished saying what it needed to say. He did not update the will. He did not call a meeting to announce the results of the challenge. He did not, in the language of the original sheet of paper, declare a winner because the challenge had not asked for a winner, and he saw now that the challenge had not been about winning. He began a series of conversations instead, with Jasper about the corridor engagement and about the distance between technically correct and genuinely useful, which was a conversation that would take a long time and might not resolve. With Fletcher about the gap between a model and the thing a model is trying to describe, and with Silas about the proposal and the business, and about whether Silas was prepared to be involved in the implementation in a role that was defined by the work rather than the family name. Silas said he was. They met twice in the 3rd month, once at the Crowe building, once at a table in the back of Cole's wash and fold, with Imani Cole present, drinking coffee from a machine that was not good, but was hot and available, which was the kind of coffee Silas had been drinking all week anyway, and which he had not mentioned finding insufficient. They talked about the North End circuit and the budget cycle and the specific costs of closing the kind of gap that does not close on its own and does not close quickly. They talked about what a second phase of the proposal might look like if the first phase hit its 14-month break-even projection. Imani Cole took notes. Silas took notes. Oswald did not take notes, but he listened with the quality of attention he brought to things that mattered to him, which was a different quality from the attention he brought to things that he merely needed to resolve. At the end of the second meeting, Oswald stood and buttoned his jacket and looked at the route chart on the wall, with the blue marker and the folded delivery schedule pinned beside it. He said, "You said the challenge wasn't about the $50. Silas said, "I said the $50 wasn't the point. I didn't say it wasn't the challenge." Oswald looked at him. "Is there a difference?" "The point," Silas said, "was whether a person with nothing but a week in a notebook could find something worth bringing back. The $50 was the constraint that made the finding honest. You can't fake your way through a week on $50. You either find something real or you come back empty." He paused. The 50 was the test. What it tested for was something else. Oswald nodded once. He picked up his jacket from the folding chair. "The notebook," he said. "Is it still with Ms. Cole?" "She kept a copy of the relevant pages," Silas said. "I have the notebook." "What are you going to do with the rest of it?" Silas thought about that. The notebook had, by the end of the week, 43 pages of entries. The observations, the receipts, the gap analysis, the running budget, the memo draft, the delivery route notes, Arden's handwriting between 2 blank pages, Mr. Alderton's name written in the margin of day 6. It was a complete record of 7 days, and it was also something that did not have a simple category. He said, "I'm going to keep writing in it." Oswald said, "Good," and left. The bus stop on the east side of Aldrich Street was reinstated in the budget cycle that followed. The Transit Authority's announcement cited sustained community advocacy and updated ridership projections for the Northeast Corridor. The woman with the 2 backpacks, whose name was not in any of the documents, whose daily 11-block walk was not in any of the proposals, but who was the first thing Silas had written about on day 2 of the week, first line, no annotation, would, when the stop reopened, shorten her morning by 22 minutes. She would not know she was in anyone's notebook. She did not need to. The stop opened on a Thursday. There was no ceremony. The bus came and people got on, which is the ordinary miracle of a thing that works the way it is supposed to work, arriving at the place it is supposed to arrive at, on a morning that does not know it has been waited for. The email chain from the Eastside Housing Group inquiry, the one with the metadata that Gaston had not read carefully enough, remained in the OPA's preliminary inquiry file. The file was not closed. It was listed in the agency's quarterly report as under ongoing review, pending additional documentation. The additional documentation had been submitted. Whether it would produce a formal finding and what that finding would require was a question that the system was still, in its slow and unsatisfying way, working toward an answer. The redacted section of Gaston's original draft email, the one he had written but not sent, the one that would have escalated the pressure on Cole's wash and fold to a formal audit, was recovered by outside counsel during the document review. It was 4 sentences long. It named Silas Crowe by first name. It described him as a temporary interference in the corridor assessment process, whose presence in the East Side was unlikely to persist beyond the current week. It had not been sent, but it had been written, which is a kind of decision in itself, and the record of it was in the file. Silas knew it was there. He had been informed during the review. He had not asked to see it. He had said only, noted, and returned to the question he had been working on, which was whether the second delivery circuit would require a third vehicle or whether the route could be optimized within the existing capacity. The notebook was open on the table in front of him. Day 41 since the challenge ended, running count. The observations had expanded well beyond 7 days. The gap he had written about on day 1 was partially addressed and partially not, and would be for a long time. Because gaps of that kind do not close the way problems close. They close the way ground shifts, slowly, incompletely, in ways that require you to keep your eyes on the level rather than the distance. He wrote the date at the top of the page. He wrote the question. He sat with it, not anxiously, with the focused patience of someone who had learned that the shape of a problem reveals itself when you stay in the observation long enough. Outside, the street was doing what streets do. The delivery circuit was running. The machine at Cole's was on its 3rd cycle. The morning had not arranged itself for inspection and was not going to. The notebook was open. The pen was in his hand. He kept writing. Oswald Crowe set a challenge expecting to find out which son could survive with less. What he found instead was which son understood what less was actually for. Jasper managed the constraint. Fletcher analyzed it. Silas walked into it with a notebook and came back with something that did not exist before he looked for it. That is the distance between competence and vision, not talent, not education, not the size of the name on the door, but the willingness to stay in a problem long enough to hear what it is actually asking. The $50 was never the point. The point was what a person reaches for when the comfortable options are removed. Some people reach for their network. Some people reach for their models. And some people sit on a back step in the early morning and ask, what does this street need that it does not have? That question, simple, unglamorous, requiring no credential to ask, is the one that changes things. Not overnight, not completely, but enough to matter. To one business, to one route, to one woman walking 11 fewer blocks on a Thursday morning. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who is still waiting to be told their constraint is the reason they cannot begin. Subscribe for more, and ask yourself, when your resources run out, what do you reach for first?